Okay, let's get started then. Thank you for joining us this morning or this afternoon, evening, if you're over in Australia, as Jack is. Today, we're going to obviously talk about the new era of search. We're going to try and save time at the end for questions. We want to dedicate a good chunk of time to any questions you might have. We've already had a couple that are pre-submitted by some of our attendees as well that we'll answer live on the call. So we'll try and save all questions for the end. So to get started, just a couple of quick introductions. My name's Oliver Brewood. I'm one of the directors here at BDB. In my role, I oversee our digital team, and I've been working within digital marketing and in SEO for around 15 years at this point, which is making me sound incredibly old as time goes on. And obviously, that's shifting now as we've got a new approach to search coming in, which is currently one of the main areas that we're focusing on as well.
And I'm Emma Sims. I'm also an executive director here at BDB. I have 12 years experience working directly with B2B brands, mainly in the pharma, nutrition and food space, to help them build visibility and drive growth. And as the content team lead here at BDB, part of my role is understanding the intersection between content strategy and generative search, and how we can shape content strategy to ensure brands remain visible.
Great. So in terms of the agenda for today, we'll be looking at first how generative AI is transforming search. We'll be looking to go into a bit into what GEO is to help you with the understanding of GEO, getting started with GEO, what some of the steps that you can do first. And also then we've got a few resources to share, and then we'll jump into the Q&A. We'll be quite quick as we go through everything. So like I say, please write down any questions you have and make sure you share them towards the end, and we'll look to answer as many as we possibly can in the time. So to start with, how generative AI is transforming search. I'm sure many of you will have been using this and seeing this already. But just to make sure we're all kind of working from the same kind of knowledge level as a baseline, traditional search engines like Google, Microsoft, Bing, we've been using them for around 30 years, not these platforms specifically, because some of them are newer, but this approach to searching is something we've been doing since the mid to late 90s. And it's something we've become really accustomed to. But now we're obviously getting platforms like Gemini, like ChatGPT and Perplexity, amongst others, really changing some of that approach and what we now term generative search. And obviously in the case of Google, those two are slightly merged, as we'll see with things like AI overviews. So I've got some slides on this, but I'm actually going to jump straight into Google itself so you can see it live in action. But I've included the slides because we will be sharing them afterwards, so you'll be able to review them later. So if I search for nutraceutical ingredients trends as something one of our clients, customers could potentially be searching for, you'll see that you get obviously your ads like we're used to, but then we're also now seeing this AI overview. So this is something that Google have introduced in the last sort of year or two, which is bringing their Gemini result straight into the search engine. Now, this is something that when it was first introduced wasn't that good, but obviously LLMs are getting better and better. And the other aspect as to why it can be a challenge from what I've personally seen is that when we're searching in a traditional search engine, we're still very often searching in key phrases. So I've said nutraceutical ingredients trends with no further explanation, no clarification. I've not even formed it into a question. Google's been able to deal with it, but I'm not giving a lot of context. But in some situations, I've seen that can hinder the quality of the AI overview that you get. But back on topic, we've got these AI overviews appearing now, and increasingly they are appearing for more and more types of search results, particularly informational search results. So I think they appear now for around 15 to 20% of searches. And interestingly, they only actually include the actual key phrase that you've searched for in around 5% of cases, which is really showing that AI is understanding the context of what's being asked for and not just going off keyword data as we have been doing for a long period of time. Now, other than Google introducing AI overviews, the other thing that you might have seen, been around in the US for a while, but has recently rolled out to kind of the rest of the world, is AI mode. So that's available up here in the top of Google. It's also accessible when you click to expand the AI results. You can see this dive deeper in AI mode button. So if I click that, what you're essentially taken to is a large language model, Google's Gemini, effectively, just skinned slightly differently. So in this context, I can have follow-up conversations and follow-up questions. So if I wanted to say, great, now who are the largest nutraceutical providers? Oh, I spelled that right, live. Then it can go and give me kind of that follow-up response based on my previous searches. Obviously, this isn't a real search, so in this case, there's not a lot of relation between them. But if I wanted to start saying, okay, what kind of nutraceuticals does Nestle manufacture, and who should I speak to in Nestle if I wanted to buy some, I can have that conversation and that journey all happening within Google. And then the other area that's happening increasingly is we're getting ChatGPT come into the mix, in particular because it's such a well-known model. And in effect, in that case, very often that is essentially doing the same sort of thing. It's doing a live search. So you can see here it's searching the web, briefly showed up there. So all this is doing is another form of search, and it'll probably be quite similar in terms of what it's providing that versus Google. The other thing that I've noticed people are increasingly doing, and I've done myself, is I've actually replaced my search engine, my default Chrome search engine, with Google. So if I just type into this bar here, nutraceutical ingredient trends, I'm going straight to ChatGPT instead of Google. At first, this was slightly jarring, but once you get used to it, it's giving you information that you need right up front without needing to kind of delve any deeper into various different websites and do your own research. And we're seeing that sort of behavior happening more and more. Just diving back into my slides. Like I say, I'll leave these here as a bit of a leave behind so that you can see them later on. But one thing I just want to note on this slide, ChatGPT in particular, obviously Google will be using Google's index. ChatGPT is using Bing's index. So when we are doing a search and ChatGPT says it's searching the web, it's effectively just looking up the answers on Bing, and Google is effectively just looking up the answers on Google. So how you rank in search results, as we'll talk about later, does come into play when it comes to your appearing within a large language model's results. I've kind of done that, so I'll skip this one. I just wanted to make a quick note on terminology as well, because you'll see these different acronyms. When we talk about SEO, we're talking about search engine optimization. It's a term that's been around for a few decades. But terminology in terms of optimizing for AI is a very new landscape. So there hasn't necessarily been one final term that has been decided on yet. As you might have gathered already from the introduction, we're leaning towards using the term generative engine optimization. This is a term that seems to be getting a little bit more traction. The top one is probably a really bad choice for people to go with, search everywhere optimization, because it's just going to confuse things with traditional SEO. But we'll have to see what the masses decide over time to see what the kind of final answer is here. You will see, I think there's an example from HubSpot later on in the presentation. They use AEO. I know SEMrush use AIO. So you will see a mix of these acronyms. So really, it's just a case of making sure that you understand when you see any of these, we're probably always talking about the same thing. So the key thing is, how will this impact B2B? It's really obvious how this impacts kind of everyday use, because we're obviously seeing that pop up all the time. But B2B is always a bit different. We've got really niche terms. There's not as much keyword search, not as many people are searching in general. But we're still seeing a very high number of B2B buyers do start their journey with search. So the latest version of this stat I can find is that 66% of B2B buyers are still using internet search results to find information, to carry out their initial research. It's the definition of search that's now changing. It's becoming more encompassing of different platforms. Another really interesting one by SEMrush is that AI search visitors are predicted to surpass traditional search visitors by 2028. That's not that far away. It's less than 2.5 years away that we're expecting to see more and more people get visiting your website that are coming from an LLM or an AI overview of some sort. So it's really important that if our B2B buyers are searching this way, that we're appearing for them and making sure that we're doing everything we can to be cited by an LLM. Now, as a result of this behavior, we're also seeing a rise in what are termed either no-click searches or zero-click searches. So where people search and then don't actually visit a website at the end of it. So on the left, you can see an example of an organization where their impressions are continuing to rise. That's fantastic. However, their clicks have kind of plateaued and aren't rising to meet the level of increase that they've seen with their impressions. The reason for that is because people don't need to click through. They're getting the information that they need straight from the search engine without going further. On the right-hand side, it's the same sort of thing. It's the pink is the percentage of keywords that result in searches that result in a no-click journey with an AI overview, and the blue is no-click results without an AI overview. So again, we're seeing it's quite a large difference there, that the AI overview is resulting in more no-click searches. Now, in theory, that's going to sound really bad, and if you're a publisher, it definitely is bad. AI taking information from your site, sharing that with people, and you're not getting any of the benefit of the visit or the associated ad revenue. That's why some publishers are very unhappy and are looking to strike deals with AI platforms to try and mitigate some of that financial impact. If you're a business, however, the good news is that so far that's not really correlating. We're still seeing that actually things are working well for businesses, because when someone does carry out search and they're getting to that point where they're ready to buy, they are continuing through to the business to engage and to make that purchase. So according to SEMrush, they're seeing that the average LLM visitor is worth 4.4 times more the average organic search visitor. I can't speak firsthand about their stat, but what I can say is we are seeing similar results with clients in that I think we have a client where we're seeing a 2% conversion rate from organic traffic, but over a 4% conversion rate from traffic that's coming from AI search. So because people are able to kind of do a lot of their own qualification, as people are used to doing these days anyway, when they do arrive at our websites, they're more likely and more inclined to be looking to make a conversion or a buying decision. So I suppose to sum that up, it's somewhere we really need to be. So the next question is, how do we go about getting there? And I think a good starting point for this is to really take a quick moment to make sure we all understand that just the basic level where LLMs are getting their data from. So there's effectively 3 sources for LLMs and data. One is their training data. And the really interesting thing here is a couple of years ago, before ChatGPT had access to web search, we were all told you can't really trust what an LLM is telling you. The information is really old. It's a year old or more. And therefore, you've got to take any results with a grain of salt. And actually, that's still 100% the case. If you ask ChatGPT right now, ChatGPT 5 has just launched. It's got a knowledge cutoff of June 2024. So if you ask ChatGPT who the president of the United States is, without using the internet, it still thinks it's Joe Biden, and it thinks that Trump's just been confirmed as the Republican nominee. An awful lot's happened since then, so that data is really out of date. So how does it plug that gap? And the answer is by using retrieval tools, and more often than not in this context, it's web search. It's Googling it for you, or in the case of ChatGPT, it's using Bing to find that information for you. And that's the only reason, or the primary reason, that LLMs have access to really up-to-date information. You can ask it questions about current events nearly as they happen, because it can just go to news sites and find out that information. And then the third source, just to mention here, is obviously user-provided context and information. So if you tell it information or you upload a document, that's obviously giving it access to information that it didn't previously have. So the next step that I think is worth looking at, because we're obviously talking about the importance of appearing in search results, so traditional SEO, for your LLM presence. Understanding the difference between SEO and GEO is therefore something that's really quite important to look at. And what I would say is it's a shift in perspective, but there is a lot of overlap. So when it comes to traditional SEO, what we're actually trying to do is we're trying to drive organic traffic, aren't we? And it's from this big long list of links that have been ranked by a search engine. What we're trying to do with GEO is we're trying to influence an AI-generated response to cite us, to trust us, to think that we're an authority on that subject matter, so that we do get included when providing an answer. So we're just going to do a few quick comparisons between the two here. So in terms of the key content elements that support that, with traditional SEO, obviously we're talking about keywords, it's backlinks, it's meta descriptions, on-page user experience, many other factors. For GEO, there's a lot of information, a lot of requirements to have factual accuracy, because that's what it wants to be providing its end users with, to have clarity, to have clear data that it's able to break down, and again, to come across as an authority that is clearly answering the questions that it needs to answer for its users. In terms of how we measure it and the core metrics that go into it, we know from traditional SEO, we've been doing it for years, it's organic impressions and then the organic visitors that come from those impressions, the click-through rate that we're seeing from that, what our average position is within search results, how we're ranking for keywords and so on. But with AI, and definitely all these measures aren't there yet, we're looking to be cited more. So frequency of citation, the number of times our brand is being mentioned in AI responses, being included in zero-click results, even if we aren't getting that corresponding visit through later. And I think the only thing that's included here that's already really somewhat measurable is that LLM referral traffic. We've got a little bit more about that later, but at least that's one measure we can already start putting in place without too much difficulty. And then just to kind of sum it up, I think this really helped me kind of fix things in my mind. With traditional SEO, we're always asking ourselves, how do I rank higher? How do I rank higher? With AI or GEO, the thing we need to be thinking about, how do I become the answer to whatever the user's being currently asking? And as I kind of hinted at, a big part of that is unfortunately ranking well in traditional search results at the minute. It's somewhat essential, and there's a couple of conflicting sources on this. One I've seen sort of says 93% of AI responses are citing sites in the top page of Google. That's slightly contradicted in a way by what SEMrush are presenting here, which is essentially showing that for the various different LLMs, there's actually an awful lot of citations that are coming from the 20+ results, so pages that are ranked further down in search results. And I think part of the reason for this, I suppose, is the depth of content. So AI has the time and ability to delve deeper to try and answer a user's specific question, whereas as humans, we don't have the patience for that. So we're always just focused on the top search results. You know, we search for anything. You'd be very lucky these days if anybody clicks to page 2. AI has a lot more time than us, and it can do things a lot more quickly than us. So therefore, I think when we're looking at like the depth of information, trying to get a response, it can afford to go further back. But appearing in those search results and appearing higher is still our aim, still has to be our aim, not just because it's more likely we're going to get cited by AI, but also because traditional search is still a thing. And the point I've not hit on here is it all comes down to also having a well-planned content strategy, because if you don't, you're not going to be appearing and you're not going to be answering the relevant questions. And we've got more on that later as well. The next area that's really important to think about, as many of you will be familiar with, I suppose, if you've been involved in SEO, is this concept of EAT. So this is part of Google's search guidelines that they use when ranking organic searches for traditional search. But it is so incredibly important as well for generative engine optimization. So it's all about making sure that you come across as an authoritative source, so that you have authoritative experience to talk about on whatever given subject matter it might be. So if you're a doctor that's particularly specialist in a certain type of surgery, being able to demonstrate that you have first-hand experience with that kind of surgery. It's really important. Conversely, experience doesn't have to mean you're a trained professional. Experience can mean that you're a patient that has suffered from a condition, so you have first-hand experience of what that means. So that's all about having the correct experience. Then it goes into expertise. So do you have the expertise and knowledge of the subject matter? There's the authoritativeness. So that's really all about how much you're being cited, how much you're being, in the case of traditional SEO, being linked to. In the case of GEO, it's more likely to be, are you being cited in different sources? So people referring to you as an authority. And then trustworthiness is more down to your basic signals of, does this page look trustworthy? Does it feel trustworthy? Do you have security measures in place, like a security certificate on your website, as an example? All of that's helping to bolster trust. But this is critical, and we'll be talking more about this later on as well. And then the final area, which I realize might be a little bit small to see, so I'll kind of talk through what's happening on page here. But essentially, citations for GEO are key. So to be cited, you effectively, we're talking about brand mentions. So brand mentions could almost be seen as like a backlink with traditional SEO. So the more you're being cited, the more the better, and the more likely it is that a generative engine is going to reference you when producing content. So on the left, I've just asked, who are the largest providers of nutraceutical ingredients? And it's pulled up a list here. And on the right, I've opened which sources are helping to compile that list. And I know you won't be able to see this, but the top three are essentially market research companies who are obviously authorities on the space. They're companies whose job it is to survey markets and understand who the big players are and what's happening within the market. And then what you can see further down is sources like trade publications being included as well, because again, they're seen as authorities on this kind of subject matter. So being cited by any of these types of players is a really key place to try and get yourself mentioned more as well. And I suppose one thing that's a little bit different, just to hit on this slide, is that with traditional SEO, digital PR is definitely beneficial. But if you've ever tried, it's incredibly hard to get publishers to give you a decent quality backlink, because they're just not interested. It's not what they want from their users. With GEO, it's not about getting a backlink. It's just about being mentioned, being covered, and therefore doing things that are noteworthy and are worthy of coverage. It's really important to getting yourselves covered. So what we're going to talk about now is where is a good place to get started with GEO. If you've not been doing much with it yet, or even if you have actually started looking at it, where might you pick up and continue that journey? And I suppose the starting point for me with anything like this is just to understand what your current position is, so you can establish a bit of a baseline, so that you understand when you start investing time and effort and money into something, is it paying off? And one tool that I think you'll probably have a bit of fun playing with is HubSpot's AEO grader. So I've included the URL at the bottom. If you want to jump onto it now, you can. It's hubspot.com/AEO-grader. But I'm just going to go to demonstrate it to you now. So essentially, you can pop in the company name. I've already kind of pre-filled this earlier, so I'm going to pick on Evonik as an example. So if I click on Evonik, I'm going to select United States. I'm going to put in nutrition ingredients, and I'm going to select animal nutrition. And what this will do is it will do a quick grade of your brand using the various different LLMs. So it uses Gemini, Perplexity, and ChatGPT to grade how likely it thinks your brand is to be included within a large language model's responses. So we can see the responses already come back from OpenAI. We get a quick overview. You can see what makes up that score. Brand sentiment is hugely important, but just in general, having presence and recognition all add towards it. And you can see overall, without having done lots of these searches, this score looks pretty good, and HubSpot's tool confirms that it's pretty good. If you go down and pop in your email address as well, you can get more insights sitting behind this. So we can see we've got a link now that will go into a little bit more information in each of them. So I'll click on share a voice, for example, and you can see based on their quick searches who's being referenced in the same breath as Evonik when it comes to nutrition and animal nutrition in particular. So we've got Evonik, DSM, we've got Cargill, ADM, and others all being mentioned. I think it's Perplexity in the middle. Yep, it's in the top. I missed that. Are obviously covering a lot more brands in here too. But essentially, this is just a really useful starting point to help you understand what you're doing well and what you could be doing more of, and how you compare to competitors in the market. So I definitely recommend it's a free tool. Go and have a play with it. If you do have SEMrush subscription, so SEMrush is one of the leading SEO tools. I know that they've got some really comprehensive AI tools, which they refer to as AIO, which kind of go into this sort of information, but in an awful lot more detail and start giving you tips as well about how to do that optimization. So if you do have SEMrush, I think it's an extra license fee to get that aspect of it, but that might be something you want to explore. If you want to speak to us about that as well, we do have those licenses, so let us know and we might be able to look into that with you as well. But yeah, definitely something I'd recommend as a starting point to understand that baseline. Jumping back to the slides, the next area I'd really strongly recommend looking at, if you haven't done already, is just looking at your Google Analytics or whichever analytics tool you use, because you'll most likely find that you're already getting some level of LLM traffic, and you might have even already had conversions from LLMs. I know we've had it personally, and we've seen clients who are also getting conversions from LLMs as well. It isn't perfectly tracked at the minute, and different LLMs kind of pass that data over in different ways. You'll see some are being flagged as referrals, so Perplexity, Microsoft, Gemini, all being marked as referrals. So when it comes to looking at channel grouping, they'll be under a referral group by default. ChatGPT typically, in my experience, puts a UTM code on the URL, so a campaign source, as ChatGPT. I'm assuming it's not always doing it, because it's also showing up in referral traffic. But basically, if you ever play around, you'll be able to find that information should exist in your Google Analytics. What I've included in the right-hand side of the screen here, just so I didn't forget really, is you can set up custom channel grouping, which will pull all of these sources together, and you can label it organic AI. So you don't have to do as much poking around. You can have that showing up at the same kind of level in data hierarchy as organic SEO, so you can do some easy comparisons between the two. I've included a link at the end of the presentation within the resources that explains how to go about setting this up. If you'd like our help to go about configuring some of this, just feel free to reach out. I'm sure that's something we could look at working with you on, but it's something I'd recommend doing for the time being, because the way it's currently grouped within Google Analytics at least isn't particularly helpful. Going back to the point, I suppose, look at where you're currently at, set a baseline, and make sure this is something that you're tracking going forward to see if you're seeing that uptick. This will be a good indication of whether or not you're being included. Hitting on a couple more technical aspects. These are probably more points to pick up with your dev team. The good news is they're not too difficult to do. What I would say is all the technical aspects that benefit SEO still apply. So things like having good site speed and site caching and not uploading large files and things like that, still hugely important to both SEO and GEO. So don't forget about those aspects. But there's a few specifically nuanced things for GEO. One of them is to create an LLMS.txt file. It's a bit of a mouthful. I'll just briefly explain what this is for anybody that's not familiar. To help traditional search engines understand the structure of your site, you'll typically have both a robots.txt file, which basically says, yes, you can browse the site, and it also includes a link to your sitemap, which is a sitemap.xml file, and the sitemap.xml will usually list every single page on your website with no further context than that. It will just list all the URLs so that when Google search bot arrives at your website, it can crawl every page. LLMs don't typically have that level of crawl budget, let's say, as a term. So they don't want to go and crawl every single page at all times. So what we want to do instead is create an easy way for them to get a snapshot of your website and the content, and you do that through this LLMS.txt. So in the left, we've got an example of the structure, and I've included a link to this at the end of the resources as well. So you can create these manually, but I'd recommend you really want these to be created a little bit more automatically, because you don't want to have to update this file every time you add a new page. On the right-hand side, I've included just a brief example from Cloudflare. It's probably not that visible for you to see on your screens. You don't need to see the detail of it, but it's basically just listing all the pages on their website, and giving a little bit of context behind what those pages are, things like titles. Sometimes it'll go into the description of what the site's about as well. The good news is if your site's on something like WordPress, there are plugins that can help create these for you automatically as well. So if you're on a WordPress site, you've probably got Yoast SEO installed as a plugin. There's a tick box in that if you're on the latest version that can just turn on this functionality. So that'll help AI crawlers straight away. And the other aspect that's really beneficial, again, really beneficial for traditional SEO, but even more important as well for GEO, is including schema markup. So again, this is something that a developer would need to do, but it's basically writing specific markup code that isn't available or visible to any user of the site, but it's just telling these systems what the page is about. So labeling an FAQ page as an FAQ page, labeling article as an article, putting your organization details together, and it's got a specific coded structure to it that you need to be following that will just help LLMs understand and crawl the data and categorize that information. So just a couple of quick notes there on the technical side. So I'll hand over to Emma to pick up on probably the most important subject here, which is content.
Thanks, Ollie. So now that we've got all the technical stuff out of the way, I think we've already discussed that GEO rewards depth and authority, and that means moving beyond kind of keyword stuffing to producing content that genuinely answers industry-specific queries. So in this next section, we're going to look at how we can make this a reality with a really robust content strategy. So with any marketing or content strategy, we want to hopefully focus our energy where it matters most. And identifying strategically relevant topics is about meeting your buyers where they are, not just the search volume or conveying the messages that your brand wants to communicate. And in B2B especially, credibility often comes from being able to explain the complex processes or regulations in a way that builds trust. So we need to target the long tail technical and niche queries your buyers really care about. So where do we start? I think we all recognize the power of AI at the moment in terms of helping us condense down vast amounts of information. So AI research can really help highlight gaps in your current coverage and surface opportunities to differentiate your voice. But where we would always recommend starting is with your customers. There's really no better source for identifying relevant topics, and it's often overlooked. So this is where feedback and building that relationship with the sales team becomes invaluable to understand the real questions that your buyers are asking. It's the most cost-effective form of primary research you will ever have, and we'll talk a little bit more about primary research later, I think. But even things from just asking questions around what are the latest ingredient or formulation trends, or how is compliance or regulation changing in this area, all of those types of questions can help feed our content strategy. Once we have that information, we can then use AI tools to help map, cluster, and prioritize these questions into a plan, into content that's both thorough and strategically relevant to our target audience. And then you'll see here on the right-hand side, we've mentioned AI personas. We've recently been experimenting with AI-powered personas here at BDB. These are essentially kind of synthetic lookalikes that represent everything the target audience thinks, says, and believes based on their digital footprint. So we've developed these alongside traditional primary research to sort of validate our findings. And now that we have these synthetic audiences, we can conduct interviews with them, not just as part of an initial strategic process. That quite often happens. We do a lot of work at the beginning, but don't tend to pull it through to the rest of the campaign or use it on an ongoing basis. So here, we want to try and use those personas throughout our comms activation process. So for instance, we might want to test resonance of messaging, or whether a creative concept is likely to resonate with our audience. And then we can also look at attitudes and opinions or behaviours around changing opinions or behaviours over time. So they're really proving to be a valuable tool, something that's much more cost effective than repeated primary research, although that's not to say that primary research is not valuable. And we're looking forward to sort of developing this going forward and seeing how we can implement it for our customers over time. So that's all about identifying strategically relevant topics. There's also a question around creating versus updating content in the arena of SEO and GEO. And I think many of us instinctively focus on creating new content. And while SEO is typically rewarded freshness and relevance, generative engines want the most up-to-date, credible source, as Ollie's mentioned several times. So if your content is out of date, it's much less likely to be cited in an AI-driven answer. And we therefore can't underestimate the importance of updating existing content. So while it won't be appropriate for every piece of content that you have, we should be looking to review and refresh content wherever possible. So if we think about a quite basic example, we have a trends article. We might have done a 2025 trends piece this year. We don't necessarily need to create a completely new piece of content every year that has no ranking signals associated with it beyond the time frame that it was destined for. So instead, making updates to the previous year's article will then work well for GEO. So with this in mind, we recommend building a process to review and refresh core assets at least annually, or even more regularly in more faster moving niches. So things like clinical research, ingredient science, or regulatory changes, they're changing all the time. So we might want to be reviewing and updating that content more regularly. Part of that process is then making these updates visible to the engines. So just simply adding updated September 2025 is a good signal to note that piece of content has been updated and flags it to the engine. But we really need to treat updates to existing content as seriously as new content, because from an AI perspective, it could be invaluable going forward. And then, as Ollie's mentioned, one of the key ways to get cited in generative answers is to make your content more comprehensive and answer ready than competing sources. Again, if we use that kind of trends piece as an example, we can probably all think of a trends piece that has been light on insight or detail. So we want to go beyond that and start making our content thorough and continually supportive of users' needs. So LLMs can be incredibly useful here, not just for writing your content wholesale, but for supporting the research and comparison process initially, especially when you're looking in that kind of content ideation stage. So whether it's this can be used for a new or an existing piece of content, we've put together a really simple 3-step process, part of which Ollie is kind of showing on the screen now, to help us create more thorough articles or content. So here we've shown an example prompt for our initial stage, which is the research stage. So this research stage, you probably all felt the benefits of this if you've played around with asking an LLM to surface the top articles, reports, or studies on a particular topic. This one's not doing it very fast. Can help pull together those initial ideas for your content piece. Our second stage, let's see if this works. Our second stage is comparison. So we're going to compare across sources. We're going to use prompts to create comparison tables, and hopefully then start to pull out key details or identify areas for opportunity or white space, which leads into our third rung of our process, which is about spotting content gaps. So by cross-checking the LLMs, you can cross-check your table that you've developed in your LLM, where you've done your comparison, against existing content, and find where are the missing data points? Are there statistics that could be updated here? Is there a different perspective that we can take? And this is just one approach. So this process here, this is just one approach that you can take and use and adapt it as you see fit. There's opportunities to be far more specific than the examples that we're showing here. For instance, if you wanted to focus on a particular channel or outlets as part of your initial research, but this is all about really sparking that topic ideation and then of the information available to us to then be able to create thoroughness in the content that we're developing. We've also talked about the EAT framework today, so just linking back to that, we wanted to provide some practical tips for when it comes to content development. Now, some of this may be familiar to you. You may think that you're doing it already, but we'd usually recommend conducting some kind of audit or using this as a checklist to validate opportunities for optimization of your existing content, as well as for your new content. So key things here are demonstrating basic trust factors, making sure that your about page highlights your accreditations, awards, track record. These small details all help reinforce authority. Showing authorship and expertise is also key. So a good example here is an AI engine is more likely to trust, and your target audience actually, more likely to trust an article authored by a PhD nutritionist or a regulatory lead than an anonymous corporate account. Then leveraging first-hand expertise, again, it's bringing your experts to the fore. It shows lived expertise. It's not just recycled and regurgitated information. Similarly, using your own assets. So original imagery, video content, and case studies sends a really strong trust signal compared to things like generic stock imagery or content. And then we mentioned citations, but grounding everything in evidence. Make sure to cite sources, embed charts into content, reference peer-reviewed studies, and keep data up to date and fresh is going to help generative engines prioritize content that is backed by verifiable numbers. So just conscious of time, so we're going to push on to the next slide. We'll obviously share the slides so you've got this available to you. Now, when it comes to new content, we utilize a hub and spoke model approach. So at its core, this model is about creating a central piece of authoritative content, the hub, and then surrounding it with multiple supporting assets, the spokes. So how it works is the hub or the hero piece of content, which could be a white paper, a trends report, or a technical guide. This goes deep. It answers the key questions to a very detailed level and acts as the definitive resource for your campaign, for example. And then the spokes, these are shorter, more accessible formats that connect back to or cite the original hub or hero piece. So these can be blog posts, explainer videos, infographics, thought leadership articles, you name it. And together they create this content ecosystem where every asset reinforces the others to amplify reach and authority. So this signals to generative engines that your brand covers the topic thoroughly and in different formats. Plus, this approach gives you lots and lots of mileage from each insight and content idea. So it therefore becomes more cost effective than kind of sporadic or reactive content development. So it's a really good tool if you're looking for a way to get started with new content or campaign. And linked to this, we mentioned those spokes around the outside of that hub. One of the biggest shifts we've seen with GEO is that AI engines don't just consume written content, they also interpret images, video, charts, and audio. So a multimodal approach to content generation is really advantageous. So what we've done here is we've been trialing various AI tools that can help us more easily generate different content types that typically have a time or resource limitations associated with them. So we just wanted to give you a couple of examples of these that you might want to go off and explore yourself. On the left-hand side, we have 11 Labs. So this is essentially AI voice generation. You can convert long-form content pieces like white papers or blogs, articles into professional quality audio for things like podcasts, or you can have like listen to this article features supporting that the user experience as well. It can also be used to localize content, so you can go into different languages, very natural sounding narration, realistic voiceovers, etc. So a really cool tool if you wanted to explore more around voice. We've then got a couple of video tools, so Lumen 5 and HeyGen. Lumen 5 is really good for quickly turning kind of long form content into short snippet, maybe 5-second social videos. So it's ideal for things like LinkedIn and trade media channels. It can help you automate script to video workflows. You can combine text overlays, stock visuals, and branding, and it can be very useful for repurposing kind of complex insights into really digestible animated summaries. HeyGen, on the other hand, is more like AI avatars for video generation. So particularly ideal when you don't have a spokesperson available to you. You can create kind of talking head style videos. They feature an AI avatar, and you use that then to explain the research or the product launch or the technical concepts, whatever it is. And again, this tool can be used to translate the same message into multiple languages. It does a kind of lip sync as well with the same avatar. Then we have Descript. So Descript is great for audio and video editing. So you can really easily edit videos, podcasts, or webinars without needing to put it into like a production team. So for instance, you can just delete filler words or shorten sections, that type of thing. You can use it to overdub and correct if someone has made a mistake when they're speaking. It's a really, really easy way to create transcripts as well from webinars and videos. And then I won't talk too much about ChatGPT. I think we've sort of mentioned it enough today, but from a content perspective, it's great at digesting a lot of a breadth and complex data and turning that into sound bites that we can use for shorter form copy. So one area where we've been using it is to create short summaries that can be placed at the top of a piece of longer form content, just to support like signaling what the piece is about and how what you're going to get from consuming that piece of content. That was a very whistle-stop tour of our approach to content strategy for GEO, but as Ollie said, very happy to answer any questions on this or work with you to sort of identify where the opportunities are for you and your brand.
Yeah, and as mentioned throughout, we've included a resources section, so you'll see this when we share the slides. If you want to make any quick notes or a screenshot of this page, please do. but it's just a few useful links related to some of the things we've talked about now. And if you want to check any of the stats or anything we've included today, we've made sure that throughout they're included in the footer of each or footnote of each slide so that you can easily cross-reference everything we're talking about. So with that being said, I suppose over to you in terms of any questions you might want to ask us. And we've only left about 5 minutes. That's the nature of trying to cover a lot in a short period of time. But in terms of questions, yeah, feel free to submit them into the questions section. We've got a few, as I mentioned, that are kind of pre-submitted by some of our customers. So we'll cover off some of these now while we wait to see if you have any other specific questions. A question I'll dive right into is in terms of updating content, which I think both Emma and I can input on, but how should we decide what content to update? We've talked about the importance of updating content. So I suppose from a digital mindset, I think one of the strongest ways to start this is just look what's performing already. So look in your analytics platform and see what content is already getting you some level of traction from search engines or from LLMs. And then build on that. You don't necessarily need to start with something that's low. Start with the low-hanging fruit and build on that. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, I just think all I'd add to that is this idea of regularly reviewing content and so almost like regimenting yourself in terms of how you approach that. I think what we see with our customers is content's created and then it's left to sort of fester on a website. So you know, always having that top of mind and going back to it. You're quite a lot of brands are already sitting on really high quality content. So if we can implement this approach of going back and reviewing content on a regular basis, it sort of minimizes the effort for maximum reward.
And then in the chat, Edith asked about gated content and white papers, and it's still very much the same answer as with SEO, I suppose. If we're talking about a PDF, yes, they can be crawled. They're not necessarily the ideal thing we want somebody to be directed to because we can't track it, and there's not typically a follow-up action in a PDF. If we're talking about gated content, it can't be crawled. So with that in mind, does it mean it's better not to have it? I think it depends what your actual objectives are at the time. From a GEO point of view, yeah, it's better for things not to be gated. But realistically, at times, we want to have gated content. What I'd say might be a strategy there is to have it gated for a period of time. While it's the most relevant, try and get some traction with it for a period of 1 to 3 months, and then consider ungating it and making that information kind of publicly available on your website. And then, Emma, in the question section, we had a question on PR and what we might want to do to support GEO from a PR point of view. We obviously talked about the importance of being cited in publications.
Yeah, so PR is an interesting one for multiple reasons. I think a lot of brands see it as an opportunity to kind of proactively communicate their own news, which is obviously a very, very important role of PR. But one of the areas where I guess can be overlooked is this idea around building relationships with the publications. The journalists and the publications represent the needs of your target audience and are most likely asking the questions that we need to answer as part of understanding or identifying these key topics. So building relationships with these publications, working with the journalists to develop content in which your brand is cited to answer these questions is all going to support your GEO efforts. So you can't take for granted sort of the long-term aspects of PR beyond the initial putting out a press release or a media alert or anything like that. You know, it's got to be a long-term approach, but it could be very beneficial when it comes to GEO.
Just as a note, we've got a few more questions to go through in chat. Emma and I are happy to stay here for a little while answering questions. If you do have to hop off because I realise we're at time, then feel free to do so, and thank you for joining. But other than that, we'll crack on now answering some of the questions. So to answer your question, Martin, so if anybody's not seen chat, Martin asked about, we're seeing, according to SEMrush, a rise in AI search, but we're also seeing a rise in Google searching. So what's kind of happening there? Is somebody searching on an LLM and then almost wanting backup from a traditional search, or is it also just people trying to search traditionally? I think, to be honest, Martin, that's probably a really hard one to answer at the minute because the data is not particularly available to us. And it gets even more complicated when we consider the searches that I used earlier. So my nutraceutical ingredients trend search is both a traditional search and an AI search because an AI overview has shown. So it depends on how the platform is actually reporting on it. So I would say SEMrush is most likely counting that as an AI search because an AI overview is being shown. I think there is still an element of people not fully trusting the answer they get sometimes. That's why LLMs are increasingly including links to their sources. So it could be people are going to continue Googling afterwards as well. So it can be a really great starting point. Explain the topic to me. Great. Now the LLMs helped to give me a lot of information. Now you're guiding my research further. So there's probably also an element of that going on as well. And I'd also say that AI platforms, LLMs, particularly when you're not talking about AI overviews, you're talking about using the platform directly, then a lot of people, we're all talking about them in marketing and in business, but a lot of people still aren't embracing them. My mum's definitely never been anywhere near ChatGPT as one example. So there are still just things that are baked into how we approach things. It will take time to shift. But I think whether the SEMrush timeline that I mentioned earlier of 2028 is correct, I think it goes without saying that search is going to shift because we're effectively just getting better and better answers from AI search, and that will continue to improve over time. And then we had a question around AI-generated content. Can that be used for blogs? How will it affect the SERPs? Does it affect ranking? Is human-written content better? I think this very much depends. Emma, you can weigh in a sec, but I think it very much depends on exactly what you're doing with ChatGPT, isn't it? Or
and how it's explaining it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not only about. It doesn't really matter who wrote the content, to be quite honest. What matters is the content good? If I say, write me an article on GEO, it will go and do it. Is it going to be any good? Probably not. I've not given it near enough information. I've not given it context. I've not told it who it's for. I've not specified a length. I've not given it an angle. If I go and train it on my tone of voice, if I tell it the insights I want it to focus on, maybe I can give it some first-party data that we've carried out, and given it a structure to work with and given it examples of other blog posts, I bet you it'll knock out a very good first draft. I would always recommend at this point in time that a person is actually doing a level of review of it. We're not just publishing from there. But can it write good content? 100%. But it needs to be guided by all of that kind of training and the angle that you're trying to approach it with for it to have a chance of being good, not just for AI, but for anybody reading it too. Because if I just give it the basic level prompt, it will always do what I asked. Write me a blog on SEO. It doesn't mean it's going to be any good because I've just not given it enough guidance. Okay, we've got another couple of questions that I'll jump into. I think one we've probably kind of answered throughout, or earlier on rather, is there's kind of a fear that we've spent a lot of time and money building a website. Are we saying that people aren't going to visit it anymore? So hopefully we're getting the idea from what I was talking about earlier, that people are still at the minute, as long as you're a business, likely to be going to your website once they're ready to convert. You do want to be, like I say, be trying to make sure you're being cited. You're almost treating GEO like a search engine at that point. You want to be cited so that when they're ready to convert, they jump through to your website to buy. If you're a publisher, I'd be particularly worried at the minute because yes, you might be in a situation where you're spending an awful lot of time and salaries on journalists, on getting these articles written, on publishing, and then you're just not getting the ad revenue, which is where I think we're seeing publishers striking deals directly with platforms like ChatGPT. Okay, any more questions that anybody wants to drop into chat? Okay. Well, if that's everybody's questions, then we can end the webinar here. Thank you very much for everybody that joined. We hope you found it really helpful. If you've got any follow-up questions that you want to ask afterwards, if you think of something later, or even after we've shared the slides and the recording, then feel free to reach out to either myself or Emma. Our details are here. If you want to connect with us on LinkedIn, we've got the details there as well. We're happy to help. We're happy to kind of chat about how this might affect your given organization as well. So yeah, feel free to reach out to us. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you do have any feedback, feel free to drop us that as well. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a great day.